A new government report says man-made climate change is already damaging the United States, and it's only going to get worse in the coming decades. The congressionally mandated report from 13 federal agencies says climate change could shrink the U.S. economy by hundreds of billions of dollars by the end of the century. The report also warns of more dangerous western wildfires, longer heat waves in the southeast, and more powerful Atlantic hurricanes. Tony DeCopel is at an Indiana farm already struggling with the effects of a changing world.
Jim Benham says he doesn't need a PhD to know that things have changed.
When we have a rain event, we're not getting an inch, we're getting 2 and 3 and 4 inches.
And what's worse, the 67-year-old farmer says all this rain isn't just bad luck. He believes it's climate change.
Doesn't take a scientist to know that you got a problem. That's what I'm experiencing.
And scientists agree. In the fourth National Climate Assessment issued Friday, 13 federal agencies warn climate change will reduce Midwest agricultural productivity to levels of the 1980s. Andrew Light, one of the report's editors, says evidence humans are causing climate change is undeniable.
The part of the country that's going to get worse fastest is actually the Midwest, which is the breadbasket of America.
The rest of the country doesn't fare much better. The report says sea levels around the U.S. have risen about 9 inches. By 2090, rising seas could cause $118 billion in property damage every year. Heat waves now last more than 40 days longer than they did in the 1960s. By 2090, outdoor workers could lose $160 billion in wages from extreme heat. In 2015, wildfires burned more than 10 million acres. That's larger than the state of Maryland. As recent wildfires like the Camp Fire have left California devastated, the report warns of hotter, drier conditions in the West.
Towards the end of the century, you could see the United States economy losing hundreds of billions of dollars every single year and tens of thousands of Americans dying every single year because of climate change. This is all avoidable.
President Trump has said that man-made climate change is a very expensive hoax, and last year he pledged to pull the United States out of the Paris Climate Accords. That's a global agreement to do something to slow climate change. But the authors of this report, a report oddly enough put out by the Trump administration, say for every dollar spent addressing global warming, we should expect $3 to $7 in savings. Tony DeCopel, CBS News, Versailles, Indiana.
And Jake Levine is a former energy and climate aide to President Obama. He works now as a climate attorney for the law firm Covington and Burling. Jake, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks,
when
Tanya.
you read this report, what worried you the most about it?
Well, look, I mean, obviously the report is quite worrisome. I think we just heard a little bit about that. But, you know, one thing that I want to point your attention to is an area where the report is really innovative. It talks about air quality, and this is a subject that has long been a question about climate change. And now we know, and the science is telling us very clearly, that with increased climate change, we can expect exacerbated air quality, worse pollution from ozone, worse pollution from wildfire smoke, which creates dangerous particulate matter. And at a moment where more than 100 million Americans are living in parts of the country that are in exceedance of health-based air quality standards, this is really critical information and critical science to have at our backs.
And doesn't this feed upon itself? I mean, the worse air quality, the more the pollution we have, doesn't that even heat the planet even more?
Well, I mean, the science around the air pollution really says that when you have hotter temperatures, it exacerbates some of our more traditional air pollutants, and it makes the air more dangerous to breathe. So populations that are already vulnerable to air pollution, elderly populations, young children, millions of people, for example, who were exposed to the wildfire smoke in the Bay Area just over the last couple of weeks, can expect to have worse health outcomes, more hospital visits, more premature deaths, more chronic respiratory and cardiovascular disease. It's really quite dire and really important that we listen to the science in this report.
Well, let's talk about some of those populations that are in danger, because obviously we can assume that they're going to start moving around, right? These populations are going to migrate. We heard how already the Midwest is feeling these effects of climate change, and we can expect, mass migration away from the coasts. So where exactly will people go?
Well, I mean, look, if you look at some of the historical population displacements that major hurricanes, major famines, major floods have caused, populations need to move around, they need to find security, they need to find safety. If President Trump thinks that he's got an immigration problem now, just look at what happened in 1999 after Hurricane Mitch hit Central America. More than 50,000 folks from Honduras and Nicaragua were granted temporary protected status to enter the United States because they were essentially refugees from the storm.
Right. Now, so of course we know that climate change and we know that a strain on resources can cause sort of external migration into the United States. But this report makes it seem as if we're going to have populations even within the United States moving around trying to find, healthier places to live. So what specific steps should the U.S. and I guess humans in general be taking right now to turn things around?
Well, it's time to start seriously limiting our climate pollution. I think one place that policymakers could look to think about what sorts of policies, what sorts of interventions might work is to look at California. This is a state that has reduced its climate pollution, it's reduced its greenhouse gas emissions while growing its economy because we set clear targets, we set clear policies that put incentives in place for businesses to reach those targets. And in the process, by the way, we've been able to spur this huge economic growth by creating new industries around wind, solar, new jobs, electric vehicles. And I think Congress really has a blueprint to look at from California.
Yeah, it seems that as if these new green industries are really crucial to our future. There's a clip from Utah Senator Mike Lee from yesterday. When asked about this report, he focused on the short-term economic effects. Let's listen.
There's no question that for a variety of reasons, and regardless of where one stands on the issue of climate change, that the burning of fossil fuels does emit into the environment a number of things that aren't the healthiest.
Should we put a price on carbon? Are you open to a carbon tax? Are you open to a carbon tax?
No, I'm not. All the proposals I've seen so far that would address any of these issues would devastate the U.S. economy and have little or no benefit that is demonstrable from our standpoint. And so I have yet to see a proposal that would bring this about. I think if we're going to move away from fossil fuels, that's got to be done through innovation. And innovation can be choked out through excessive government regulation. We can't let that happen.
So, here's the internal conflict here, the worry about short-term business prospects in the U.S. versus the long-term health of the country and the planet. So what sort of innovation is he talking about here, and what would be a bipartisan solution in the immediate future? Because it seems like we need to think about something sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and look, I mean, he's not wrong to talk about innovation, but I think it was my former White House colleague, Jon Favreau, who pointed out on Twitter the irony of Senator Lee's statement, which was that the whole report talks about the economic consequences of inaction. And so to talk about sort of the short-term losses to turn this ship around really is sort of a convoluted message. But look, the way to find innovation, the way to harness innovation, ingenuity, the American spirit of the economy that we've seen rise to the occasion in the past across so many different types of environmental regulations is to set the targets now and incentivize businesses to innovate and invent these new industries of the future. We saw that with the ozone, the hole in the ozone layer. We've seen that with all kinds of environmental regulation over time, and we have a clear blueprint to do that now, and we need to start moving on it soon.
Jake Levine, former White House climate aide. Jake, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tanya.